All right, everybody, what is going on? Good afternoon. Hope you guys are doing well. And now that we are several days clear of the 2026 NFL draft, now that we've all had the opportunity to process what this team and other teams did, and now that we've had the opportunity to really think about where teams stand going into the 2026 season, knowing that there's not a ton that's going to happen between now and the start of the year, there's going to be some stuff, but we know that for the most part, things are relatively settled, and the things that are going to happen between now and September are mostly going to be like minor adjustments to expectations, with maybe one or two exceptions. We can start asking some bigger questions about where things sit as we go into 2026. This video is sponsored by Prize Picks, more on them a little bit later, but I want to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the Seattle Seahawks and where they sit within the NFC West. And obviously, we know where we are going into the 2025 offseason, or going into the offseason from 2025. We won the division. We won 14 games. We beat all of our division rivals twice. We lost 2 games in the division, but they were earlier in the season, and we also beat both of our primary division rivals in the postseason. So, combine all that with the fact that we won the Super Bowl, this is clearly going into the offseason the number 1 team in the NFC West. But are they still the number 1 team? Let's talk about that for a little bit here. Are they still top dog in the NFC West? And you take a look at where things sit right now, if you're a Seattle Seahawks fan and you're trying to be somewhat objective about things. Let's start by talking about the Seahawks for a minute here before we get into the division rivals, because that's ultimately the goal here. You want to win the Super Bowl, but usually winning the Super Bowl starts with being the best team in your division. And if this team loses the division to a rival in 2026, then that's kind of a non-starter. Then how are you going to win the Super Bowl when you can't even win your own division? It's a lot harder. So let's understand something. The Seahawks in 2025 were the best team in the division, but for the most part, they have lost players in the offseason. They didn't lose a lot, but they did lose some players of value and are mostly going to try to replace them with rookies. That's always a little bit of a dicey proposition, no matter what. We did not sign any big outside free agents. We did not acquire players that are an obvious and immediate upgrade. We are trying to mitigate the loss by getting either undervalued players or rookies. Ken Walker goes, just won Super Bowl MVP. So we get Jadarian Price, a rookie, and Emmanuel Wilson, a career backup who has shown positive signs for Green Bay, but not really done a lot in this league. You lose a guy like a Kobe Bryant. Well, you've got Ty Okada ready to go, so maybe it won't be a big loss, but presumably there will be some kind of loss. And then you get Bud Clark. Bud Clark, I like him. I'm intrigued by him. I think he can be good, but he's a rookie, and Kobe Bryant was a veteran and had established himself to be one of the better safeties in the league. Same with a guy like a Reek Woolen. Yes, Reek Woolen, deeply flawed player. Absolutely. But he leaves. You didn't really sign anybody to replace him. You drafted Julian Neal, a rookie who I don't believe is ready to play a lot of football yet. So you are definitely extending yourself trying to replace these guys. I think that's a completely fair statement. If you like sports, the best way to make them better and more exciting is using Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. Prize Picks, all you got to do is pick more or less on your favorite players' projections and build lineups with a few taps. It's the daily fantasy stuff, but it's made super easy over there. Whatever sport you're into, give it a shot. And right now, Prize Picks is hooking up users with $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. All you have to do is use promo code HMA. I've had a great time on Prize Picks so far. It makes this daily fantasy thing very easy, and it makes watching the games way more exciting. Be sure to check out the social feeds feature so you can share lineups with your friends and tail partners or even fade their picks. Right now, Prize Picks is offering odds on the NFL draft. You have who's going to go where, what each team is going to do, how many of each position is going to go in each round, and so on and so on. Get on over to Prize Picks. Take advantage of that. So download Prize Picks today, America's #1 sports app, and remember to use the promo code HMA. And remember, always gamble responsibly. So that's one element here, but there's another piece. The Seattle Seahawks are going to be leaning on some of the players that they have already on the team improving in 2026. Like, just as an example, Sam Darnold. And I know he played well last year, but I think there is at least somewhat reasonable expectation he gets better in 2026 just because of the fact that he's going to have a full year of experience with these players and possibly shave the turnovers down. He could end up being more effective or at the very least more efficient, and that's a difference. A full year of Rashid Shaheed, instead of only having Shaheed for half a year and not really having great rhythm with Shaheed because he just got there mid-season, he could actually be a bigger part of the offense now. Arroyo, second year for him. He should be better. He should be more effective. He should be more able to make meaningful contributions. The offensive line, mostly made up of younger players that have a good chance of improving in 2026. Zabel especially, but Jalen Sundell could improve. Anthony Bradford could improve as well. Like, these are guys that are going to benefit from the extra year in the same scheme. I know we lost the offensive coordinator. It's the same scheme. Go to the defense. Riley Mills could be a lot better and more valuable to this team than he was in 2025 because Riley Mills barely played last year. Byron Murphy could get better, actually. He's still very young. Drake Thomas, first full year as a starter. Remember, he did not start the season as a starter last year. He could get better. I think that there is some opportunity for a guy like Nick Emanwari to get better, even though he's already really good. So there are things on this team that we can point to and go, yeah, we had that guy last year, but there is a reasonable expectation he is going to improve this year just by virtue of the fact that he is a year older and a year more experienced. And who are the players on this team that we're worried about diminishing because of the other side of it? Right? Like, who are the players that are aging out? Maybe Cooper Kupp. Well, that's why you re-sign Shaheed. So Kupp can afford to age out a little bit and it doesn't really matter that much, right? That's like the main guy offensively. Defensively, there are guys like Leonard Williams. But the thing to remember about Leonard Williams is that he is an athletic freak. So he has the opportunity to stay at a high level for longer than you would expect an NFL player because he has that athleticism and freakish nature that will allow him to stay on top a little longer. So I don't think that's a surefire thing. Jaron Reed, yeah, probably, but there is stuff going on in that defensive line that is set up to mitigate that, like Riley Mills and Byron Murphy improving. I don't think this team is heavily leaning on Reed for the 2026 season anyway. The big concern would be edge rusher DeMarcus Lawrence and Uchenna Nwosu. Those guys are getting older, and Nwosu already showed signs of breaking down last year, but that's kind of the thing. Nwosu didn't do a ton in the second half of the year and postseason last year, and you didn't really see a big drop-off anyway. The team was able to get through the rest of the season fine. They were excellent for most of the second half of the year with Nwosu kind of getting limited back down to just being a run defender who didn't do a lot as a pass rusher. So even that kind of stuff is not hugely significant for this team. But with all that being said, what about the division? Now, I'm not really going to talk about the Cardinals thing. They are so far behind us. They are so far behind everybody else that, yes, they got better this offseason just by virtue of the fact that they kind of have to. But at the same time, did they actually Kyler Murray is not a terrible quarterback, and now he's gone and you replaced him with Carson Beck? Is Jacoby Brissett even going to play? Like, they've got some older players on this team too, by the way. They've got some guys who you wonder about a little bit. Like, I think one of their best players last year was Calais Campbell. He's gone now. Buda Baker's a year older. That's a little bit concerning. They do have young guys that should improve, but it's certainly not set in stone. Like, Marvin Harrison Jr., is he going to end up being the player that we thought he was going to be in college? At this point, I don't think it's a guarantee. And they're also the team that is completely unproven at head coach. They're the one team in this division that is completely unproven there. So, yes, Jeremiah Love is going to help that team. Marvin Harrison Jr. should make some strides forward. Maybe Bizontis is going to make improvements for that offensive line. Maybe guys like Walter Nolan, Darius Robinson, and I don't know, Will Johnson will step forward in 2026. But overall, I'm not seeing overwhelming reason to believe that this team is making a significant step forward at this moment. Now, the 49ers are interesting, obviously, right? But the thing with the 49ers, and I think that most Seahawks fans would agree with this, is that they are good, but there's a sense that it's going to be very hard for them to be there at the end of the season because they are such an old team. Christian McCaffrey, now they add Mike Evans. To a certain extent, Christian Kirk. I don't know how much they're going to lean on him, though, but Christian Kirk. George Kittle coming off a major injury. Kyle Juszczyk, Trent Williams. And defensively, they're a little bit better off, but even Nick Bosa is starting to get to a point where you're a little bit concerned, especially because he's missed so many games lately. And Fred Warner finally had a season derailed by injury last year, so there's at least a little bit of consternation there. But especially offensively, which is the seat of their power, this is where the magic happens for the 49ers. They are very old, and even if they are good for most of 2026, what are they going to have left in the postseason? Are they going to have their legs? Are they going to have health? It seems unlikely. So, yeah, this roster in theory can go toe-to-toe with the Seahawks and Rams at the top of the division, especially with Shanahan. But is that going to hold up for the 2026 postseason after these guys have to get through a full year? I think there's an expectation that McCaffrey is going to already be kind of deprioritized and maybe even moved to glorified slot receiver. And then what? Is that going to make the same impact on the team? Who's their running back ultimately going to be? So I'm not really thinking too much about the 49ers either, even if they may be comparable early in the season. I think by the time you get deep into the season, it's going to be tough. We know how Shanahan does things with his roster. We're really talking about the Rams here, and this is where I wanted to ultimately get to here. And the question I want to ask people watching this video, do you think the Rams have leapfrogged the Seattle Seahawks? Do you think that the Rams are now a better looking roster going into 2026? Because this is a team that is supposedly going for it. I know that they kind of cast that perception into doubt with the way they drafted, and there is some maybe room to disagree. But you take a look at this Rams team, they brought back a pretty significant amount from last season, and they upgraded their biggest weakness defensively at cornerback with two significant moves. So I know I made that video laughing at them for their bad draft, but understand that I was only laughing at them because they had the bad draft. I don't think this is a bad roster. I don't think that this is a bad team, and I don't think this team is ill-equipped to be good in the 2026 season. So what they did in the draft does not undo the fact that this is a dangerous-looking team. Now, the main issue that you probably have looking at these guys is age and regression, and where does the improvement come from? Who on this team is going to get better to make up for potential regression? Like, Stafford has nowhere to go but down because he just won league MVP and he's very old and very worn down. Kyren Williams, I think he is what he is. I don't think he has another level up he can go as a running back in this league. I think that Puka almost won Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, he's probably can't get much better than he already is. Adams, there's nothing but downside there because he's getting old and he's already starting to get injured. Mostly the guys on the offensive line, I don't think there's a lot of room for them to get better. I think they are what they are. They don't have like a Gray Zabel guy who seems like, oh, not only is he really good now, but he's going to get better. I don't see that with any of these guys. Terrence Ferguson is probably your one big bet here. Ferguson can make strides forward as a tight end and maybe provide an upgrade over what you had in 2026, but I think that's about it. Defensively, maybe, right? Maybe. I think that the main guy you're looking at is Jared Verse because he didn't play extraordinarily well last year. But a lot of these guys kind of feel capped out at this point. Maybe Braden Fisk could get better, but Puna Ford's probably going to regress because he's starting to get up there in age, and they put a lot on his shoulders in LA, and eventually that's going to wear down on you. But I'm not seeing a ton of guys that I think have an extra level they can go up. If you get into the secondary, Quentin Lake didn't miss games last year. Maybe you could talk me into Cameron Kinchins. But Cam Curl is what he is, a good player, but I don't think he's going to become Ed Reed overnight or anything like that. The main improvement here is just Jalen Watson and, of course, the big one, Trent McDuffie. And they did lose Akello Witherspoon and Kobe Durant to make room for those two guys, so they did make a little bit of a swap there. I think they lost a couple other corners as well, but that is the big area of improvement for this team. And of course, I don't think I need to say this, but they also have a big positive at coach with Sean McVay. They're still doing very well there. This whole division, except for the Cardinals, is very, very proven at the head coaching spot. So are they better than the Seahawks going into the 2026 season in terms of their roster? This is clearly the one that I think is the strongest to debate because they were close to us last year. They beat us once. They lost a really, really, really crazy back and forth overtime game. And then they played a playoff game that was ultimately close and competitive. I think it was a little deceptively close and competitive, but it was still close and competitive and lost in Seattle in the NFC title game. So they were close. It's not ridiculous. One thing I would say is that at the end of the year, they looked clearly worse than Seattle for most of those games. This was a team that barely beat the Bears, barely beat the Panthers, lost to the Panthers earlier in the season, that lost to the Falcons, and really kind of limped their way into that NFC title game and then played really well there. But still, it's got to be pointed out that they are one of the very few teams that has shown they know how to put a dent in this Seattle defense. But I think that the risk of downside on this team is significant. I think that there is significantly more potential downside here than there is upside. Excuse me. If Stafford regresses, if Devontae Adams regresses, because they didn't really get a wide receiver replacement for Adams if things go south there. If there's regression with some of these other players, like mostly on the offensive line, I don't think that'll happen. But the Stafford thing overrules everything else because that is so important. If Puna Ford regresses, that really hurts what they can do up front. If Trent McDuffie isn't as billed, then that kind of undoes a lot of what they tried to do this offseason to improve. So ultimately, I don't think that this Rams team has clearly caught up to us. And I still think we head into the season with the best depth chart in the division. But this is the one that makes it interesting. So let me know what you think down below. Let me know how you feel about this. And do you think the Rams have caught us? Do you genuinely think the Rams have caught us? And if not, why? If you do, why? Just open question. I think this is an interesting debate. And it's reasonable to think this. Like, what if Jared Verse becomes a Will Anderson level player this year? That changes things dramatically, and that's on the table. What if Kobe Turner or Braden Fisk becomes a better player in 2026? I think that's at least on the table here. I think that you could have an interesting discussion about somebody like a Trent McDuffie being an elite corner for them. So there's some stuff that can happen here. There is. But overall, I think that things are likely to balance out in LA, and they may end up not even balancing out because they are putting a lot on the shoulders of Matthew Stafford, who is on borrowed time on some level. All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks. I want to hear what you guys think about this one. And probably another video later today, but if not, I'll see you guys tomorrow. I'll start streaming on Twitch at some point, maybe tonight, maybe not, but go Hawks, and let me know what you think about the crew from LA and maybe a little bit of San Fran too, and how they stack up to the Seahawks as we start the season and as we think about the 2026 year.